At 78 years old, Arnold Schwarzenegger has conquered everything. 7 Mr. Olympia titles, Hollywood superstardom, Governor of California, a legacy that turned bodybuilding into a worldwide phenomenon. But there's one name that still haunts him, one rival he's never fully been honest about. Until now, Sergio Oliva, the myth, the only man who ever truly defeated Arnold on the Olympia stage. For decades, Arnold kept quiet about what really happened between them. The victories, the defeats, the controversies that bodybuilding fans have debated for over 50 years. But recently something changed. Arnold started talking, and what he's revealing is shaking everything we thought we knew about their rivalry. This isn't just about two bodybuilders going head to head. This is about respect, revenge, and questions that have never been answered. Questions about the 1972 Mr. Olympia, where even Arnold himself admitted something was wrong. Questions about why Sergio was mysteriously banned right when he could have reclaimed his throne. Questions about a rivalry so intense that it pushed both men to their absolute limits. Sergio the Myth Oliva wasn't just another competitor. He was a phenomenon that defied belief. A Cuban defector with a physique so incredible that people literally thought it was impossible. Arms that measured 23 inches. A waist so small it made his massive torso look even more unreal. When Arnold first saw him, he didn't just respect him. He feared him. And now, after all these years, after Sergio's passing in 2012, Arnold is finally breaking his silence. He's admitting things he never would have said during his competitive days, things about who really deserved to win, things about the system that may have been rigged, things about the greatest bodybuilder who never got the recognition he earned. What Arnold is saying now contradicts everything he's claimed for half a century. And it all centers around one competition, one controversial night in 1972 that changed bodybuilding forever. The night that Sergio walked away from the sport, convinced he'd been robbed. The night that even Arnold's own words suggest wasn't fair. So what really happened between these two legends? Why is Arnold finally telling the truth now? And what does this mean for Sergio's legacy? Before Sergio Oliva became a legend in bodybuilding, he was just a kid in Cuba with dreams bigger than the island could contain. Born in 1941, Sergio grew up under Fidel Castro's regime, where opportunities were limited and freedom was a fantasy. But Sergio had something special, something that would eventually make him untouchable in the world of bodybuilding. In 1962, everything changed. Sergio was part of Cuba's weightlifting team, competing in Jamaica, but he had no intention of going back. When the team arrived, Sergio saw his chance. He slipped away from his handlers and ran straight to the American embassy. He defected, leaving everything behind for a shot at the American dream. That decision would alter the course of bodybuilding history. Sergio arrived in Miami with nothing. No money, barely any English, and no clear path forward. But what he did have was a body that seemed to break the rules of human genetics. Even as a weightlifter, people noticed something different about him. His proportions didn't make sense. His structure was unlike anything anyone had seen before. When Sergio discovered bodybuilding and started training seriously, the transformation was terrifying. His waist measured just 27 inches, creating a taper that made his upper body look like it belonged to a comic book character. His arms exploded to 23 inches of pure muscle. His chest expanded to 58 inches. But it wasn't just the measurements, it was how everything came together. The proportions, the muscle bellies, the way his body seemed to defy physics. They started calling him the Myth, because people genuinely couldn't believe what they were seeing was real. When Sergio walked into a room, conversations stopped. Bodybuilders who had been training for years looked at him and questioned everything they thought they knew about building muscle. Some thought he was using special drugs that nobody else had access to. Others believed his Cuban genetics were just built different. The truth was simpler and more frustrating for everyone else. Sergio was a genetic freak, a 1 in a billion combination of muscle insertions, bone structure, and pure physical gifts. His lats were so wide they looked like wings. His arms had peaks that seemed cartoonish. His legs were massive but perfectly proportioned. And that tiny waist made everything else look even more extreme. Sergio wasn't just big, he was aesthetic in a way that bodybuilding had never seen before. He brought size and symmetry together when most bodybuilders could only achieve one or the other. By the mid-1960s, Sergio was dominating amateur competitions. He won the Mr. America in 1966, and it wasn't even close. Then he turned pro and entered the 1967 Mr. Olympia, bodybuilding's most prestigious title. He won. Then he won again in 1968, and again in 1969. 3 straight Olympia titles, and nobody could touch him. He was bodybuilding's first real mass monster. The guy who proved you could be huge and still look like a work of art. But Sergio's reign was about to face its biggest challenge. A young Austrian with ambition burning in his eyes was coming up fast. Arnold Schwarzenegger had been watching Sergio, studying him, obsessing over how to beat him. And in 1969, Arnold finally got his shot at the Olympia stage. That's when these two forces collided, and nothing in bodybuilding would ever be the same. Arnold Schwarzenegger walked into the 1969 Mr. Olympia with confidence most 22-year-olds could only dream of. He'd already won the Mr. Universe title. He'd been training obsessively, building a physique that was turning heads across Europe and America. In his mind, he was ready. He was going to take Sergio's crown and announce himself as bodybuilding's new king. Then he saw Sergio backstage. Years later, Arnold would describe that moment with brutal honesty. He wasn't just impressed, he was shaken. Sergio was standing there, warming up, and Arnold realized he'd made a terrible miscalculation. This wasn't going to be a competitive battle. This was going to be a massacre. Arnold had seen photos of Sergio. He'd studied them, analyzed them, convinced himself he could match up. But photos don't capture reality. They don't show you how a man's presence fills a room. They don't convey the three-dimensional mass, the way muscle stacks on muscle, in ways that seem impossible. Sergio in person was something else entirely. Arnold admitted defeat before he even stepped on stage. He looked at Sergio and knew there was no path to victory. Not that night, not against that level of development. In Arnold's own words, he walked into a wall. A wall of muscle, genetics, and dominance that he simply couldn't break through. When the judges made their decision, it was unanimous. Sergio Oliva retained his title. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the future 7-time Mr. Olympia champion, settled for second place. The only time in his entire Olympia career that Arnold would stand on stage and not leave as the winner. For most people, that would have been devastating. A crushing blow to the ego that might have ended their competitive career. But Arnold wasn't most people. He didn't sulk, he didn't make excuses. He studied. He watched Sergio on that stage and made mental notes about everything. The posing routine, the confidence, the way Sergio controlled the audience. Arnold was already planning his revenge. But here's what makes this loss so significant. Arnold never forgot it. Decades later, he'd still talk about that night with a mix of respect and frustration. He described Sergio's physique with an honesty that he rarely showed about other competitors. Arnold knew he'd been beaten fair and square by someone who was simply better that night. The 1969 Mr. Olympia created something dangerous in Arnold, a hunger that went beyond normal competitive drive. Sergio wasn't just another opponent to beat. He became the standard, the benchmark, the dragon that Arnold had to slay if he ever wanted to prove he was truly the best. Arnold went back to California with a fire burning inside him. He trained harder, he refined his posing. He studied every aspect of Sergio's physique and figured out where he could improve. Because Arnold knew something that Sergio might not have realized. This wasn't over, not even close. The rematch was coming, and Arnold was going to make sure the outcome was different. Arnold learned something crucial from his 1969 defeat. Beating Sergio wasn't just about muscle, it was about getting inside his head. So months before the 1970 Mr. Olympia, Arnold did something calculated. He traveled to Chicago where Sergio lived and trained, just to watch him, to study him like a scientist studying a specimen. Arnold showed up at Sergio's gym unannounced. He watched Sergio train, took mental notes on his routine, analyzed his weak points, but more importantly, he started playing mind games. Arnold would make comments, subtle jabs disguised as compliments. He'd praise Sergio's physique while planting seeds of doubt. He was building a psychological strategy that would be just as important as his physical preparation. By the time the 1970 Mr. Olympia arrived in New York, Arnold had transformed himself. He'd added size where he needed it. He'd perfected his posing routine, but his secret weapon wasn't visible in the mirror. It was his unshakable confidence. A confidence so strong it could make other competitors question themselves. The competition was intense. Both men brought their absolute best. The audience was electric, knowing they were witnessing something historic. When it came time for the pose-off, the moment that would separate the champion from the runner-up, Arnold made his move. He convinced Sergio to walk off stage first. The story goes that Arnold told Sergio they should leave together, that they'd already shown everything they needed to show. Sergio, trusting Arnold's suggestion, walked off. But Arnold stayed. He kept posing, commanding the stage, controlling the narrative while Sergio watched from the wings. It was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. When the judges tallied their scores, the room held its breath. This wasn't going to be unanimous like 1969. This was going to be close. And it was. The decision came down to a 4-3 split. 4 judges for Arnold, 3 for Sergio. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the new Mr. Olympia. But the controversy started immediately. Fans and competitors alike questioned whether Arnold truly deserved the win. Some thought Sergio's physique was still superior. Others believed the judging was influenced by politics, by Arnold's charisma, by the IFBB's desire to promote a new champion who could bring bodybuilding to the mainstream. The debate raged in gyms and magazines for months. Arnold didn't care about the controversy. He'd won, and that's all that mattered. As he stood on stage with his trophy, he leaned over to Sergio and said something that would haunt their rivalry forever. Enjoy it, because this is the last time. Arnold wasn't just making a prediction. He was making a promise. He was telling Sergio that the era of the myth was over. Sergio was stunned. He'd lost by the slimmest margin possible, and now Arnold was declaring that he'd never reclaim his throne. The respect between them started to crack. This wasn't just competition anymore. This was personal. Arnold had proven he could beat Sergio, even if it took every trick in the book to do it. The physical battle was close. The mental battle, Arnold had won that decisively. He'd outthought, outmaneuvered, and outplayed the champion. But what happened next would make the 1970 controversy look tame, because the IFBB was about to make a decision that would keep these two from ever having a fair rematch. What happened in 1971 exposed the corruption at bodybuilding's core. Sergio competed in the NABBA Mr. Universe in London, just like Arnold had done the previous year. But when Sergio showed up to defend his Olympia title, he was told he'd been suspended. The IFBB, controlled by Joe Weider, banned him from competing for going to a rival federation's show. Yet Arnold had done the exact same thing a year earlier without any penalty. The message was clear. The rules applied differently depending on who you were and who was protecting you. Arnold won the 1971 Olympia unopposed, while Sergio was only allowed to guest pose. Fans who were there said Sergio looked better than everyone on that stage, including Arnold. Sergio Jr., Sergio's son, has spoken publicly about how his father felt betrayed by the sport he dominated. The suspension wasn't about rules. It was about making sure Arnold's path to becoming the face of bodybuilding had no obstacles. Sergio could have walked away right then, and nobody would have blamed him. But his pride wouldn't let him quit. He came back in 1972 determined to prove that politics couldn't stop genetics. The 1972 showdown should have been Sergio's redemption. He'd been training under the legendary Arthur Jones, inventor of Nautilus equipment, and came in at what many consider his best condition ever. His muscle maturity had caught up to his genetic gifts, and he was absolutely shredded. But once again, controversy erupted before Sergio even walked on stage. There were allegations that judges had been instructed on how to score the competitors, with specific focus on downplaying Sergio's strengths. Sergio's stage positioning during comparisons consistently put him at disadvantages, standing further back or at angles that didn't showcase his physique. Arnold took the win, but fans and fellow competitors weren't buying it. Multiple bodybuilders who were there have said in interviews that Sergio won that contest, and the decision was pure politics. Sergio's frustration reached its breaking point. He left the IFBB and competed in other federations where he continued dominating, but he'd never get another shot at Arnold on the Olympia stage. The bodybuilding establishment had made its choice, and Sergio Oliva wasn't it. Arnold secured his place in history, but the questions about what could have been if the sport had been fair have never gone away. Sergio's life outside bodybuilding was marked by struggles that would have destroyed a lesser man. Back in 1962, before his Olympia wins, Sergio competed in the Mr. America and experienced blatant discrimination. He won every single body part comparison, judges admitting he had the best arms, best chest, best back, best legs. Yet they placed him second overall. The racism was so obvious that it made national news, and Sergio's response was to simply get better and more undeniable. Then came 1986, a year that almost ended everything. During a domestic dispute with his wife Arladis, she shot him 5 times. 5 bullets entered his body, and somehow Sergio survived. He was still working as a Chicago police officer at the time, and the fact that he lived through that incident and continued working is almost as unbelievable as his bodybuilding career. His personal life was complicated, especially his relationship with his son Sergio Jr., who has spoken about the distance between them. Despite winning genetic lottery and having a physique that influenced generations, Sergio's life was filled with battles that had nothing to do with bodybuilding. The man who seemed invincible on stage was fighting demons that no amount of muscle could protect him from. Arnold's recent reflections reveal a truth he's spent decades avoiding. In his newsletter and interviews, he's called Sergio one villain that he needed to push himself beyond his limits. He's compared their rivalry to Batman needing the Joker, saying that great champions need great opposition. But what's striking is how Arnold frames it now. He talks about Sergio with genuine reverence, admitting that the myth had genetic advantages Arnold could never match. When Sergio passed away in 2012 from kidney failure, Arnold's tribute was surprisingly emotional. He called Sergio one of the greatest bodybuilders who ever lived, and a true friend, words that felt like they carried the weight of buried guilt. Because Arnold knows what the bodybuilding community knows. His victories over Sergio came with help from politics, judges, and a system designed to make him the star. That doesn't diminish Arnold's accomplishments or his incredible physique, but it does add context. Sergio forced Arnold to become the champion he became, pushing him to levels of development and intensity he might never have reached otherwise. Their rivalry made both men legends, but only one of them got to write the history books. Now, at 78, Arnold seems to be trying to correct that record, giving Sergio the flowers he deserved while he was alive. The truth is that Arnold and Sergio's rivalry changed bodybuilding forever, but not in the way it should have. Sergio represented pure genetic supremacy, the idea that some people are simply built different and no amount of politics should overcome that. Arnold represented something else: strategy, psychology, business savvy, and the understanding that bodybuilding was as much about narrative as it was about muscle. When Arnold won, he proved that the sport wasn't just about who had the best physique. It was about who could control the narrative, who had the right connections, and who the industry wanted to promote. That legacy has shaped modern bodybuilding in ways both good and terrible. Arnold went on to become the most famous bodybuilder in history, a Hollywood icon and a political figure. Sergio remained in Chicago, working as a cop, training clients, and living a quiet life far from the spotlight he deserved. The question that haunts bodybuilding fans to this day is simple: what if the judging had been fair? What if Sergio had been given the same promotional machine that pushed Arnold to stardom? Would we even know Arnold's name? Or would Sergio Oliva be the one with movie deals and global fame? Arnold's recent admission that Sergio was his dragon suggests he's thought about this too. At 78, maybe he's finally ready to acknowledge that some dragons never really get slain. They just stop competing while the victor gets to tell everyone he won.